Hi everyone, hope you've had a good week. If you get a chance, read Parshas Lech Lecha. It makes for a very exciting action drama. Hollywood has got nothing on Lech Lecha. There's everything in it. There's famine, there's kidnappings, there's wars, there's battles. It's a really very exciting Sedra. So one thing I want to highlight in this week's Sedra is this idea of repeated patterns. If you read through the Sedra, you'll come across some stories that you think to yourself, I'm sure I've had something like that before. So Ramban highlights it for us, and he gives us this concept that Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labonim, whatever happened to the forefathers also happens to their children. It's the idea that history repeats itself, that the future almost echoes the past. And we see this play out a lot in this week's Edra. So, for example, Avram goes down to Mitzrayim because there's a famine in the land of Israel. Years later on, his grandson Yaakov takes his family, all the Shavatim, with him down to Mitzrayim because there's a famine. And that is how, as a nation, we ended up in Mitzrayim. And when Avram leaves Mitzrayim this week, he leaves with great wealth and possessions. And that's exactly how we leave, again, hundreds of years later, with all the riches of all the Egyptians that we take out with us. Now, even in their own personal lives, history repeats itself. Sarah is not kidnapped once, but she's kidnapped twice. First, she's kidnapped by King Paro and taken to his palace to be his wife. And then later on in the Sedra, she's captured by King Avimelech. Exactly the same thing happens. She's taken to be his wife and to live in his palace. So even within her own life, the pattern repeats itself. But of course, it also reminds us of a story much later on in our history of Queen Esther, who gets taken to the king's palace, to King Ahasuerus, and gets held there against her will and becomes his wife. So we see we have this repeated pattern. Another thing that happens this week is that Sarah is barren. She can't conceive. She's infertile. And we know that all of the Imahos, that Rivka and Rachel, also struggle to have children. So what is the point in all of this? Why does history keep repeating itself like this? So I attended a really interesting lecture this week where we were talking about the idea in counselling and therapy of transference, that often as adults we relive our childhood and past experiences will keep replaying themselves in our present day life. So normally it's talked about in a negative way. For example, an abused child will become an abuser as an adult because that's what he's always known. But maybe we can flip this idea on its head. Maybe past experiences can be used as a tool for growing instead. Maybe learning from the mistakes of others can help us to not make those same mistakes ourselves. It's always better to learn from someone else's mistakes rather than your own mistakes. So I can imagine that when Rivka, in a few Sedra's time, was barren and she's struggling with that and she's davening to Hashem, her husband Yitzchak can turn around to her and say, you know what, hang in there. My mother Sarah was only 90 when she had me. So, you know, we've got time. It might still happen. And of course, it does still happen. And again, Rachel, the next generation on, the same thing happens. And it's nice to know that someone else has been through what you've been through and come out okay. So that's why we have these stories that are passed on. I can imagine Esther in the palace of Ahasuerus thinking back to her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother Sarah and thinking, you know what, someone else has been through what I'm currently going through. And it turned out okay. You know, the Jewish nation survived. And that is what we do. We're survivors. And all in every generation when we've had terrible things happen to us, I can imagine that, for example, somebody in a Holocaust camp might have said to himself, you know what, I'm going to survive this because I know that, you know, my parents and my grandparents, my great-grandparents, they've been through similar experiences and they were okay. It turned out okay. So maybe the tool we can take from this week's Sedra is to look into our past and grow from it. And also in our present day situation, anything negative that we've been through, we can turn that around and turn it into a positive experience by using our own tools that helped us to survive, to help somebody else to get through what they're currently going through, whether it's a bereavement, whether it's an illness, anything that you can do to help them because you've already done that. It can really help to know that you can come out the other side and be okay. Have a good week and a good Shabbos.